So for this week, the first thing we're going to talk about, genetics. And the first thing we're going to talk about is Mendel and the gene idea. And so this will be over 2 chapters in the textbook. So the question is why your family is so messed up. That one I might not be able to answer. But I want to look into Mendel and some of his accomplishments. He is the known as the father of modern genetics. He was a meteorologist, a mathematician, a biologist, and a friar, an abbot at the St. Thomas Abbey in what's now known as the Czech Republic. So really what I want to talk about is what he came up with. So he was really a scientist who wanted to do some studying. And at the time, becoming an abbot was a way to have some free time to pursue these choices. And he was very good at what he did. And so he actually worked in their fields. And so he's very famous for working on pea plants. So again, he is the father of modern genetics. His pea plant experiments were conducted 56 to 63 and pretty much set the rules for heredity today. And so he came up with 5 different rules. And I'm going to tell you that number varies on who you talk to on which ones are considered actual rules. I guess the minimum amount of rules would be 2. The most I've heard is 5. I've broken it into the 5. And again, I'm not overly concerned on the numbers and things like that. There's a couple with names you definitely need to know, and you want to understand what he came up with. So pea plants are great plants. They're luckily he picked them. That some of the heredity is pretty straightforward. If he had picked some other species, it might have created some problems. Pea plants have multiple differences, lots of different characters. He really focused in on 7 of those. And so what I want to do is, the 7 aren't probably all that important, but a couple of them are used in kind of some of the original thought. So I think it's important. One is flower color. And so you'll see that pea plants come in either purple or white. He also looked at the color of the peas themselves. They actually came in at green and yellow. And another characteristic he looked at was whether they were smooth or whether they were wrinkled. So there's quite a few characters that he could have looked at. And again, luckily, the 7 he looked at breed pretty close to what they're supposed to. So that he got lucky on that. Also, what we're going to do at the beginning here is explain some terminology that needs to be done. And so we're going to do that throughout some of these recordings. One is the word character and trait. Those come up quite often. So I want you to understand what the difference between those two are. Character is an inheritable feature that varies among individuals. So it could be something like flower color. It could be pea color. It could be pea shape. Those are all characters. The trait is the variant of that character. So for flowers, it would be purple or white are the traits of that character. Green and yellow would be the traits of the character pea color. And then wrinkled and smooth might be the character, might be the traits for the character pea shape. So character and trait have slightly different meanings, and sometimes they're kind of used interchangeably. So you want to be careful with that. All right, the next one is he took a quantitative approach on looking at this stuff. And so he basically counted numbers, and we're going to talk about that later when we talk about Punnett squares. So again, some definitions. He always started out his crosses with what we call true breeding organisms. So with flowers, especially, what he did is made sure that what we call the parent generation were true breeders. And a true breeder would be one that all of their offspring are going to be the same character and trait that they are. So what he's saying is if he breeds a purple flower, he's picking ones that their offspring are purple, and then the offspring are purple. So after a couple of generations, he's sure that this thing is breeding true. The same with the white flowers. And so that's where you get the P generation. That is where you start. Again, they are true breeders that we know. And today we know that that means that their genotype is homozygous, and we'll talk about what that term means in a minute. Okay, and then what you would do after that is go through our different layers, and the F1 generation then would be the first filial. Filial, I think it's Latin for son, and so that would be the first generation of crossing two true breeders. And then F2 generation is taking two of the kids from the F1 generation and breeding them together to get the F2 generation. So this is a typical language for for crossings. All right, so let's talk about Mendel's laws. The first law he came up with: alternative versions of genes account for variation. And another word for those variations of genes is called an allele. So if you have an allele for, if you have a gene for a certain character like flower color, the alleles would be either purple or white. And so he came up with that idea. The next one would be for each character, an organism inherits two alleles, one from mom, one from dad. What's really kind of remarkable is they hadn't talked about chromosomes yet. He really didn't have a concept about meiosis. And so this is kind of forward thinking at the time. So very, very cool. Another law: if the two alleles at a locus are different, one is dominant and one is recessive. This is not 100% true, but it was for the P characters he looked at. So that is also pretty smart of him. He got lucky on working with P's. And so the idea here is that one of them will show up and then one of them will not. So for this example, the purple flower would be dominant and the white flower would be recessive because the children come out purple. Mimicking the one. The third law: the two alleles segregate during gamete production. Again, you know, this egg and sperm. Again, the idea of chromosomes weren't known yet, but this one has a name to it. It's called the law of segregation. So the theory is that you have two alleles for each character, and then when you produce egg or sperm, each one of those will go into a separate egg or a separate sperm, depending on if you're male or female. And this, for the most part, again, is true. Now, what I do want to let you know is that we have found out some things are more complicated, as in there is some incomplete dominance we'll talk about. Some characters have multiple genes for traits, so it's not as cut and dry as this may be. Such as skin color has over 250, I think it's 260 something traits, maybe even more than that for skin color. So anyway, in humans, it can change, but for the most part, for very simple genetics, this is true. Law of segregation, and it always does separate in the egg and sperm. And with that, we'll leave it for the first one, and we'll continue to go through some terms in the later videos.